जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारी
For the opportunity to share something with you. So I was thinking about what we could discuss this morning. Prabhu said it's up to you, whatever chapter you want. So I decided to pick a verse from a very famous chapter. Maybe before we begin, they did an analysis once of Srila Prabhupada's quotations, the verses that he always quoted from Shastra. And they did a count up of all the main verses that Prabhupada ever quoted. And there were 3 chapters of the Bhagavatam which were clearly the chapters from which Srila Prabhupada quoted the most verses. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to what any of those chapters may be?
Divinity and Divine Service?
Yes. Number 1, the first one, Navina Nirada said, is Canto 1, chapter number 2, Divinity and Divine Service. Prabhupada profusely quoted from that chapter. 2 other chapters, by far, that Prabhupada quoted more.
Teachings of Lord Rishabdev.
Right. Canto number 5, chapter number 5, Teachings of Lord Rishabdev. So many famous verses. Don't be a guru if you can't deliver your dependence, we were speaking about yesterday, from that chapter.
Praise of Prahlad Maharaj.
Yeah, Prahlad Maharaj, the saintly son of Hiranyakashipu, Canto number 7, chapter number 5. Okay. I always sometimes do that just to judge where the audience is at, so now I know I'm out of my depth because you all know Prabhupada's books very, very well. So yes, thank you so much. So yeah, these are the very famous chapters. I thought we could pick a verse from Canto number 1, chapter number 2, Divinity and Divine Service. I guess many of you will know this verse, but you can also, if you have a phone or a device, you can pick it up. It's text number 8. Very, very famous verse that Srila Prabhupada also quoted many, many times. So I thought I'll share a few thoughts on this and then we can have maybe a discussion. So if you can repeat after me responsibly. Dharma svanustita pumsha
Dharma svanustita pumsa
Vishwakshena katha shruya
Vishwakshena katha shruya
Padayed yadiratim Shrama eva hi kevalam Dharma svanustita pumsha Vishwakshena katha shruya Padayed yadiratim Shrama eva hi kevalam Dharma svanustita pumsha Vishwakshena katha shruya Padayed yadiratim Shrama eva hi kevalam
Dharma svanustita pumsam
Dharma svanustita pumsam
Vishwakshena katha shruya
Vishwakshena katha shruya
Padayed yadiratim
Padayed yadiratim
Shrama eva hi kevalam
Shrama eva hi kevalam
Dharma svanustita pumsam
Dharma svanustita pumsam
Vishwakshena katha shruya
Vishwakshena katha shruya
Padayed yadiratim
Padayed yadiratim
Shrama eva hi kevalam
Shrama eva Kevalam.
Dharma Swamustita Pumsam
Dharma Samustita Pumsam.
Vishvakshena Kathasuya
Vishvakshena Kathasuya.
Notpadayed Yadi Ratim
Notpadayerayatim.
Shama Eva Hi Kevalam
Shama eva hi kevalam.
Word for word. Dharma.
Dharma.
Occupation.
Occupation.
Svanustita.
Svanustita.
Executed in terms of one's own position.
Executed in terms of one's own position.
Pumsham.
Pumsam.
Humankind.
Humankind.
Vishvakshena.
Vishvakshena.
Personality of Godhead.
Personality of Godhead.
Plenary portion.
Plenary portion.
Shatashu.
Shatashu.
The message of.
The message of.
Yaha.
Yaha.
What is.
What is.
Na.
Not.
Utpadaye.
Utpadaye.
Does produce.
Does produce.
Yadi.
If.
Radim.
Radim.
Attraction.
Attraction.
Shrama.
Shrama.
Useless labor.
Useless labor.
Eva.
Eva.
Only.
Only.
He. Certainly.
Certainly.
Kevalam.
Kevalam.
Entirely.
Entirely.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The occupational activities a man performs according to his own position are only so much useless labor if they do not provoke attraction for the message of the personality of Godhead. Purport. There are different occupational activities in terms of man's different conceptions of life. To the gross materialist who cannot see anything beyond the gross material body, there is nothing beyond the senses. Therefore, his occupational activities are limited to concentrated and extended selfishness. Concentrated selfishness centers around the personal body. This is generally seen amongst the lower animals. Extended selfishness is manifested in human society and centers around the family, society, community, nation, and world with a view to gross bodily comfort. Above these gross materialists are the mental speculators who hover aloft in the mental spheres, and their occupational duties involve making poetry and philosophy or propagating some ism with the aim of selfishness limited to the body and the mind. But above the body and mind is the dormant spirit soul, whose absence from the body makes the whole range of bodily and mental selfishness completely null and void. But less intelligent people have no information of the needs of the spirit soul. Because foolish people have no information of the soul and how it is beyond the purview of the body and mind, they are not satisfied in the performance of their occupational duties. The question of the satisfaction of the self is raised herein. The self is seen beyond. The self is beyond the gross body and subtle mind. He is the potent, active principle of the body and mind. Without knowing the need of the dormant soul, one cannot be happy, simply with emolument of the body and mind. The body and mind are but superfluous outer coverings of the spirit soul. The spirit soul's needs spirit soul's needs must be fulfilled. Simply by cleansing the cage of the bird, one does not satisfy the bird. One must actually know the needs of the bird himself. The need of the spirit soul is that he wants to get out of the limited sphere of material bondage and fulfill his desire for complete freedom. He wants to get out the covered walls of the greater universe. He wants to see the free light of the spirit. That complete freedom is achieved when he meets the complete spirit, the personality of Godhead. There is a dormant affection for God within everyone. Spiritual existence is manifested through the gross body and mind in the form of perverted affection for gross and subtle matter. Therefore, we have to engage ourselves in occupational engagements that will evoke our divine consciousness. This is possible only by hearing and chanting divine activities of the Supreme Lord. And any occupational activity which does not help one to achieve attachment for hearing and chanting the transcendental message of Godhead is said herein to be simply a waste of time. This is because other occupational duties, whatever ism they may belong to, cannot give liberation to the soul. Even the activities of the salvationists are considered to be useless because of their failure to pick up the fountainhead of all liberties. The gross materialist can practically see that his material gain is limited only to time and space, either in this world or in the other. Even if he goes up to the Swarga Loka, he will find no permanent abode for his hankering soul. The hankering soul must be satisfied by the perfect scientific process of perfect devotional service. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So with your permission and blessings, I'll proceed. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada, as the perfect messenger of the Bhagavatam, is always reminding us of the greatest need. The Shastra, the sadhus, the saints are always reminding us not to miss the point. Srila Prabhupada did say that once to Dribhuvanath Prabhu, that Krishna consciousness is so simple, you may just miss it. So that point, that somehow or other we may miss the point, that is such a big probability in the world we're living in today. And that is such a big probability even for the members of the Krishna consciousness movement. We may miss the essence. Once one man, he was driving along and he saw two men, and it was a little bit of a strange sight because they both had shovels in their hand, and one of them was digging up the road at the side of the dirt at the side of the road. He was making a mound of earth. And then another man was taking a shovel and taking that same dirt and putting it back in. So he drove back, he thought, that's a bit strange. Anyway, he came back one hour later and he saw that they had continued going down the road doing exactly the same thing. Making all these holes, one of them, and then filling it up, the guy straight after. So he went up to them and he said, what are you guys doing here? It's a little bit strange. They said, we're doing our job. They said, what kind of job is this? They said, we're planting trees. He said, but one of you are just, digging up the dirt and one of you are putting the dirt back in. He said, yeah, the third guy, he's sick today. He didn't turn up for work. But it's work as usual. The show must go on. And then at that point he realized, Shrama eva, hi kevalam. This is useless labor. Because you're missing the point. The purpose of digging it up and putting it back in is just so that in the middle you can put a seed. Because that seed is the essence of the activity. So Shastra is always reminding us that we could miss the point. For example, Krishna goes to Kurukshetra to secretly, his real purpose is he wants to see all the Brijabasis again. But as Krishna comes to Kurukshetra, all the sages come. And when the sages come, Krishna just begins to glorify them at Kurukshetra. And in one verse, beautiful verse, he says, Yatirtha buddhi shalilena karhichich janeshva vigyeshu saeva gokara. Krishna says that your appearance here in the holy place is the real fruit of going to a holy place. Because in this verse, Krishna reminds us that we may miss the point. If you come to a holy place, Janeshva Vigyeshu, but you don't meet the saintly people, you don't speak to the saintly people, you don't hear from the sadhus, then you miss the point of coming to a holy place. So Shastra reminds us, don't just go to a holy place to bathe in the rivers or see the Leela Stulis, but to ultimately hear. Because if you don't do that, you've missed the point. Or for example, Balaram comes into the assembly where Romaharshan Sutta is speaking. And as Romaharshan Sutta is speaking, all the Shastra Setihasa Puranani Dharma Shastrani Sarvashaha. Maharaj knows everything. He knows the Itihash, he knows the Puranas, he knows the Dharma Shastras. He's an eloquent speaker. But when Balaram comes in, he fails to acknowledge the presence of such a illustrious personality. And Balaram is heavy. I mean, Balaram is the Adi Guru, and Guru is heavy, and therefore Balaram is like Adi heavy, like super heavy. And Balaram looks at Maharaj Sutta and he says, Adantasya vinitasya vrita panditamanina nagunaya bhavanti sma natasyeva jitatmanaha. He says, you're sitting here on the Vyasasana, you're speaking so many things, you know all the Shastra, Adantasya Vinitasya, but you have not developed any good character. You have not developed humility, Vrita, Pandita, Manina, but you think you're a big Pandit. Nagunaya Bhavanti Sma. From all of your study of scripture, good culture must have come about, but it hasn't come about. Natasyeva jitatmanaha, and therefore all your study of scripture is just like an actor learning his lines from a script. That was heavy. I always remember this because in the Chaupati library they have this verse there, that through all of your study, if we don't develop good character, if we don't have culture, if we don't know how to interact in a community with the Vaishnavas, then we've missed the point. You see? So all these warnings are there. Mahaprabhu goes to East Bengal, and in East Bengal he meets Tapan Mishra. And Tapan Mishra has studied so many things. But what does Mahaprabhu say to him? Bahu Shastra, Bahu Vakya, Chite Brahma Hoy, Sadhya Sadhana Shreshta, Na hoy nishchoy. You studied all this Shastra, but you haven't understood what's the sadhya, what's the ultimate aim of it all, and what's the sadhana. If you study, but you don't know what's the sadhya, the goal of it all, and you don't know the sadhana, then what's the point of all of that study? Bahu Shastra, so many books you've studied, Bahu Vakya, you've heard so many things, but you haven't established, you missed the point. Again and again and again, we can miss the point. In the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, Maharaj Nimi is inquiring from the Yogendras, and they give him exquisite philosophy. And in one of the verses, the Yogendras say to him, Archayame Vaharaye Pujam Ya Shraddhaye Hate Natad Bhakte Shuchanyeshu Sabhakta Prakrita Shmrita. That one who worships the deity and sees Krishna as the deity, but cannot see Krishna within the living entities, cannot see Krishna within the hearts of the devotees and the non-devotees, such a person has missed the point. Through all the worship of the deity, what is meant to awaken is a consciousness of Krishna and a sensitivity towards others. And if through all of the worship of the deity that doesn't come about, then you've missed the point. So can you see, you can go to a holy place and miss the point. You can worship the deities and miss the point. You can study all the Shastra and miss the point. And here, the sages are reminding, Sutta Goswami is reminding that if you practice all of your Dharma, if you do all your occupational activities according to Varnashram, Notpadayed yadi ratim, but the rati, the attraction, the absorption in the Supreme Lord does not come about, then you've also missed the point. In the 3rd canto of the Bhagavatam, Kapila Dev says to Devahuti, Nei hayat karma dharmaya na viragaya kalpate natirtapad sevayai jivan api mrito hi saha. Kapila Dev says, all your karma should lead to Dharma. All your activities of this world should lead you to the point of Dharma. But then what he says is, na viragaya kalpate. All of your dharma should ultimately lead you to vairagya, detachment. And then he says, natirtapada sevayai. And all your vairagya should ultimately lead you to tirtapada sevayai, just complete bhakti, complete absorption in the lotus feet, the lotus service of the Supreme Lord. In other words, Kapila Dev says, if your karma doesn't lead to dharma, it's a waste of time. If your dharma doesn't lead to vairagya, it's a waste of time. And all the vairagya in the world, if it doesn't lead to bhakti, it's a waste of time. Srila Prabhupada's godbrother, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, he said, we are not trying to become freedom. We are not trying to attain freedom from attachments. We are trying to become slaves of love. We're not just trying to become, because even vairagya, that's not the goal. The goal is to become a slave of love. And so here, this is a very, very important point, because this is the orientation which helps us understand whether we're going in the right direction in our life. Everything we do, everything we're engaged in, everything we deem as a goal or an aspiration in our life only has meaning if ultimately it's leading to the awakening of deep attraction to Krishna. That is ultimately the North Star that we're following. And so this dynamic of Dharma and Bhakti is a very, very interesting dynamic. Because on one hand, you see the Shastra is promoting us to follow Dharma. But then on another hand, the Shastra is promoting us to go beyond Dharma. On one hand, Krishna says, Dharma sanstha panarthaya, I come to the world to establish Dharma. And then that same Krishna later on is saying, Sarva dharman parityaja, give up Dharma. Of course, there's many ways to explain why Krishna seemingly says different things. When I read that verse first time, I was like, is this a printing error? Surely it should be Sarva adharma parityaja, give up all religion. No, give up religion. Very interesting. Dharma can be overemphasized, and Dharma can also be underemphasized. Dharma brings structure and stability, but Dharma can also be stifling and suffocating. Therefore, it's very, very complex. Therefore, sometimes you see in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes, often he is promoting, honoring, and establishing Dharma. And then at other times, he's saying, go beyond Dharma, forget Dharma, transcend Dharma. So therefore, in a devotee's life, to know how to balance Dharma and Bhakti is actually a great art. Because, as I said, Dharma can be overemphasized or Dharma can be underemphasized. One devotee said this, maybe it's a little simplistic, but it maybe has some truth to him. He said, the more west you go, Dharma is underemphasized. And the more east you go, Dharma is overemphasized. So it can sometimes be like that. That sometimes, in some times, places and communities, people think, no, it's just all about bhakti, and we're the movement of transcendence, and we're just trying to attain love for Krishna, and all of this dharma, that's lesser. We don't need that. That could be one extreme. And on the other extreme, people just focus so much dharma. Satkarma, Nipuno, Vipro, Mantra, Tantra, Visharada, so many mantras, so many tantra, so many niyams, so much dharma, a ritual for this, that. It's an eclipse today, quick, do a yajna. And then they forget, no, but bhakti goes beyond all of that. All of that is meant to lead us to fall in love with Krishna. So the balance between Dharma and Bhakti is a very important balance to strike. Some people practice Dharma, as we said, but they forget that the goal is Bhakti. So therefore we see in the 10th canto, in the most elevated pastimes of love, that ultimately then we see the exemplars of devotion, the gopis, who are our example. Ramya Kachid Upasana Vrajavadu, we're following them. And what was their ultimate great quality? Uddhava says, isn't it? That they just gave up everything. Asamaho charanare nujasamaham syam vrindavane kimapi kulmalato sadhinam. I just want to become a creeper in Vrindavan, and I want to become a creeper off the main road of Vrindavan in some grove somewhere, because those are the groves that the gopis walk into when they're in complete separation from Krishna and complete transcendental madness, and as they roam in the groves looking for Krishna, crying out, Krishna, Krishna, then maybe they'll step on me, and maybe when they step on me I'll get a particle of the dust from their lotus feet and my life will be successful. Vrindavane kimapi gulmalato sadhinam. Why are the gopis so amazing? Yadustyajam swajanamariya patam jahitva. Because they were ready to give up everything. They were ready to be fearless, flexible, fully available for Krishna. They were ready to renounce all dharma, all social ties, in order to just run to be with Krishna. So Dharma without Bhakti is wrong. It's not the goal. Therefore the Bhagavatam is always flipping the hierarchy, if you see. Because according to Dharma there is a hierarchy. But the Bhagavatam is establishing that the hierarchy is not based on dharmic considerations. The hierarchy of who's elevated is based on who has the most bhakti. According to Varnashram Dharma, men are the natural gurus of society. So then what does the Bhagavatam do? The Bhagavatam flips it and then has all these stories where the women come out as exemplars of bhakti because they have devotion. So therefore the Nagapatnis are glorified more. The wives of the Vedic Brahmanas are glorified more. Because the Bhagavatam wants to show it's not about dharmic consideration. Bhakti is highest. According to dharmic considerations, the sannyasis, the tyagis, the renunciates are the natural gurus, the respectable. So then what does the Bhagavatam do? The Bhagavatam gives a story of Ambarish and Durvasa Muni, where a householder, someone seemingly engaged in material activities, is coming out to be a higher grade of bhakta because he has love, he has devotion. According to social position, kings, the saintly kings are considered higher than just the sudras or the workers. So then what are we finding in the 5th canto? The Bhagavatam flips it. Jadabharat is carrying the palanquin of Rahugana. And as soon as Rahugana hears some of the transcendental instructions from his mouth, he gets off. He comes down from his palanquin and he bows to Jadabharat. And Jadabharat gives him instructions on how to control your mind. And so Bhagavatam flips the hierarchy. It doesn't matter who has bhakti, they are the highest. So some people fall into the trap of dharma without bhakti. But we can also fall into the trap of bhakti or trying to pursue bhakti without following dharma. That's also a consideration for a devotee. Dharma and following our Varnashram Dharma actually has a very deep purpose. There are many gifts that come when we follow Dharma. Although Dharma is not the goal of life, when we follow Dharma, there are many gifts which come, which support the awakening of bhakti. When we follow Dharma, we get purification of the heart. When we follow Dharma, we develop good character. When we follow Dharma, there is a sense of peacefulness that arises in our own consciousness, that arises in society because things are organized properly. When we follow Dharma, then in this way we build a very, very strong foundation for Bhakti to come about. And therefore so much of Srila Prabhupada's works was also to establish Dharma, to establish Varnashram Dharma. So it's interesting, one devotee, just before the lockdown, he was on Govardhan Parikrama, and he had become a Sankirtan devotee many years ago, and like many devotees, he had just left everything behind, just to join the temple and just to do Srila Prabhupada's service and work. And then later on, he was feeling a little bit bad because his parents were a little elderly, and he felt as though he had just given everything up, all of his duties and responsibilities towards them, to serve Srila Prabhupada very sincerely. But still he felt he had been a little bit insensitive, and that was creating a block to his bhakti. So he was having these thoughts. And then just before the lockdown, he was here in Govardhan, and he was doing parikrama. And as he was walking around Govardhan, he came to, they have these wells where they have the lever and the water comes out. So he walked past this well, and there was this young boy, very young, maybe like 5 years old. And he was pumping the well, and his elderly father was underneath the well, and he was pumping the well, and the water was coming out, and he was cleaning the body of his father. So this devotee stopped and he looked at that. Because he was already feeling bad. I had neglected my Dharma towards my parents. So he was thinking, oh my God, is this a sign from Krishna? Look at how this young boy is so lovingly serving his father. Is Krishna trying to tell me something? So he saw that scene very early on in his parikrama, and then for the rest of the parikrama, and they say when you do Govardhan parikrama, then Giriraj is following you and he fulfills your desires. So it's thinking, Krishna, if you want me to do something about my Dharma, then you please give me an opportunity. And then what happened is he went back to England and then lockdown hit. And he got locked down at home with his parents. And, you couldn't go out on Sankirtan. So it's like, okay, here I am, I'm with my parents. And so he just began serving them. He thought, oh my God, Krishna has made this arrangement. Krishna has just made this arrangement so I can serve them. So he just started serving them, and there was no question of feeling mental that I'm not going out on Sankirtan because no one could go out. And he was just serving them and serving them. And what happened after 9 months is that both of his parents got COVID. And within 2 months of each other, both of them left their bodies. And he was able to be with them throughout that whole thing, and he got all the maha items for them, and such an auspicious departure. And within 2 months, he served them in that way, did the best he could as a son to take them on their journey. And they both left the world. The world opened up. He began going out on Sankirtan again, and he said, when I went out on Sankirtan again, it was like a different experience. It was like, because I had fulfilled that Dharma, and because I had developed a bit more sensitivity in my heart as a result of doing that Dharma and serving my parents in that way, I felt like I could just engage in devotional service and preaching and sharing Krishna consciousness with such a much more open and loving heart. And he was appreciating that even our Dharma has a part to play in our bhakti. And sometimes we can think like, oh yeah, Dharma, that's just lower stuff, But no, it can also give many, many gifts. So here, in this verse, Krishna is reminding us, Dharma samustita pumsham vishvakshena kathasuya, that all of your Dharma if it doesn't lead to attraction for Krishna, Shrama eva hi keva, it's a waste of time. But remember also that following Dharma is also part of the Bhagavatam's teachings, part of Srila Prabhupada's teachings, and therefore a life in which we honor Dharma and ultimately pursue Bhakti as our ultimate goal, that kind of life is very, very powerful and very, very fulfilling. And yes, Srila Prabhupada is explaining in the purport, the whole world is just going on trying to satisfy the body and mind. We have to care for our body and mind, but ultimately we have to feed the soul, and therefore Srila Prabhupada in the purport gives the classic example of the bird in the cage. You've got to maintain the cage, but don't forget to feed the bird, because that is the ultimate purpose of our life. Hare Krishna. So I think we have 15 minutes, we go till 9 o'clock. So it would be nice, I'd maybe just open this up for maybe some reflections or some discussion, some corrections. Yeah, just like this talk. Yeah, Relation.
I really enjoyed the class so much, and as you were discussing Sarvadharman, Parityaja, and these different sort of a hierarchy where, you know, not to overstress Dharma but not to understress it, I couldn't help but remember you're having quoted Ramananda Rai Sambad in Vrindavan. And right after Sarvadharman Parityaja and Brahmabhuta Prasannatma comes Gyane Prayas and Mudapasyananta Eva. And there's this sort of hierarchy being expressed. But in that context, Mahaprabhu is asking, what is the ultimate, you know, give me the ultimate thing. He's not saying, give me the process. So it's not that he's rejecting Gita, it's just, you know, he's really put, and after that, you know, it goes into coward boy to parental to conjugate, you know, there's like this, just this ever building thing happening there. But the point of my question is that from where we are to that point, as you climb that hierarchy, it doesn't feel so simple. It's so simple you might miss it, but then throughout the class, you're describing how incredibly complex it is to find that balance between overemphasizing Dharma or underemphasizing it. And so where I see the simplicity is that one's mood, developing humility, you know, developing enthusiasm to serve the other Vaishnavas. And it's anecdotal, but in my experience, in my devotional career, there have been times in my life where I felt 100% dedicated. I was just all in, no reservations, dived headfirst. But because I was immature, what followed was sort of the school of hard knocks, where I was all in at that moment, but then, you know, something happens, you commit an offense, this or that happens, and you tumble out of it, and then you go all in, and gradually that levels out. You also described that in one of your classes. I forget, for the sadhaka, there's Adav Shadda Tatag Sadhu Sangho Bhajana. In Bhajana Kriya, you mentioned that there are these different pitfalls or different things you have to work through. And so I guess what I'm trying to understand is how we boil it down that it's so simple you might miss it when it actually seems so complex. It actually seems so complex. And is it just that in the purificatory process we just have to get bashed around a little bit? Is that just, you know, part of the process, or am I missing something where I can dodge all of that and actually find the simplicity there where the path is you know, blissful without all the smacks?
Yeah, I think it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj who came to Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, I thought you said spiritual life was easy. And Prabhupada said, no, I said it was simple. So it's almost like that. It is simple. But then we live in a complex world. And then on top of that, we're complex. So that's a double complexity. So then that makes it a little difficult. I'll share a few thoughts Yeah, I mean, Mahabharata is there. Why is Mahabharata there? Because one of the main things Mahabharata is trying to show is how Dharma is so complex. Because you have so many things to balance. And then how are you going to balance all of those considerations and put everything in the right hierarchy? Arjuna is having a dharmic confusion. He has a Kula Dharma, Dharma to his family. But then he has a Kshatriya Dharma, a Dharma as a warrior. But then he has a Pati Dharma, a Dharma as a husband. But then he has so many dharmas, Sanatan Dharma, he has a spiritual Dharma. So how do you balance all these dharmas? It's very, very complex. So that's, it is difficult. I think the first and foremost thing that you said, which is our own sincerity. Because Krishna will help us to understand, like this devotee had that realization, because he was very sincere, that no, I need to put a little bit more emphasis in my bhakti. So because that sincerity was in his heart, then Krishna revealed, yes, and Krishna arranged the situation, yes. So you can't beat sincerity. Ultimately, Krishna is guiding the wanderings of all living entities. So as long as we're introspective and always praying to Krishna, then Krishna will give help. But then Krishna also gives help through the Vaishnavas. So that's another consideration. That's why we need Vaishnavas, because Vaishnavas can help us to understand, are you overemphasizing or are you underemphasizing? Do you need to put a little bit more weight here, or do you need to start moving to this side a little bit more? Yeah, so then the Vaishnavas. But here's one other thing I'd say. What we tend to do in life is we compartmentalize. And what we do is sometimes we juxtapose Dharma and Bhakti, as if it's like, yeah, I've got 24 hours in a day and I'll do like 18 hours for dharmic stuff and I'll do like 6 hours for Bhakti. And we tend to see them as separate things. But gradually what we can begin to try and do in our life is integrate. So your dharmic, this is daily Varnashram actually. The idea is to try to integrate your dharmic activities, your dharmic responsibilities in such a way that it becomes more and more direct contribution to the awakening of devotion to Krishna. So like a classic one would be career. Sometimes we think of career as just something, okay, I've got to do it just to make money to survive. But then when devotees become a little bit more ingenious, they can begin to think about how to do a career which is dharmic, which earns them money, but which can also help them to do some direct devotional service, and which can, so okay, wow, so now we're, liberating two birds with one samosa, instead of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So then we're doing both things simultaneously. So I think sometimes we tend to put Dharma and Bhakti at odds with each other when we can actually begin to integrate more and more. And that kind of life is very, very powerful. So these are some thoughts.
Those are really nice thoughts. If I could have one just on the last point, I think one of the things that makes us pull those two apart is that every example where someone kicks Dharma out and surrenders fully, or does something at the exclusion, or doing the opposite of Dharma, it's like so glorified in Shastra that we think, that's where the glory is, these opportunities. It's almost like you're looking for an opportunity to slight Dharma in favor of Bhakti.
Yeah.
Is that to be understood that these examples in Shastra are just very high personalities, and that's not what we're trying to do? We are trying to integrate our Dharma.
Yeah, well, if you want to do Sarva Dharman Parityaja, then you also have to do Mame Kam Saranam Raja. That's the deal. It's like you can't, like if you take a cassette, then you have to get side B with side A. You can't just have one side. It used to be like that. When you had cassettes, it was like you really wanted the song on side A, and the side B song was just like a junk song. Like, okay, but you have to take it. It comes with it. So yes, you can't just, if you're going to do that. Yeah, Bhagavatam does say, Devarsha, Bhutapta, Nrinam, Pitrinam, Nakin Karo Nayam, Rini Charajan, Sarvatmanaya, Saranam Saranyam, Gato Mukundam, Parirityaka. If you surrender to Krishna, you're not indebted anymore to the demigods, to your family, to your And that's the verse we cited when we walked away from home. I'm free. Yeah, but then you begin to realize maybe I'm not as surrendered as I thought. So I remember that actually when I left home. For Indian parents, when you leave home, it's like the whole world has fallen apart. You know, it's like a catastrophe of gigantic proportions. You know, so like I remember the day I left home to join the temple. And I literally walked out. My parents were crying like anything. My dad, he was like, I've got to be careful because these devices. Anyway, they were emotional, very emotional. And then I remember going to the station and I had packed my bags and I was also emotional, 21, left home. And then I took the train to the station where the devotees were going to pick me up. Anyway, I got to the station, I was so emotional. And I got to the station, and then the devotee was meant to pick me up, didn't turn up for like 3 hours. I was like, I just left all these loving parents at home, and these guys, they can't even pick me up from the station. Did I just make a big mistake? I was like, I was having major doubts at that point. Anyway, the devotee came. And I remember this moment very, very, I was sitting in the ashram and I was just thinking, I've caused so much pain. I've caused so much pain to my parents to be here. Now I can't space out. Now it's okay, you done this, but now you can't space out. Now you have to give it your all. And I don't know if I managed to do that, but I'm still trying. But yeah, there's that sense that then if you are going to, then you have to really. So yeah, anyways, that's one point. Yeah.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Maharaj. Thanks for sticking it out. So there seems to be two approaches. One is that we should try to gradually raise people from ignorance to regulated work, to mode of goodness, and then add a little bhakti, and then so gradually. The problem is that people may get stuck in productive mode or in yoga mode, or I'm feeling good, and then the other strategy, which it seems is the strategy that Prabhupada took, that he picked up the people who were available, who were of all sorts, and he just added bhakti to their lives, irregardless of their background. So there's always that conundrum, like, okay, which strategy do we take? Then if you take people from all sorts of backgrounds, they don't have the culture, they don't have that support system, it's very chaotic. They can become very surrendered, but still there are like a lot of gray areas, or like areas that are just totally left out. So what should be our approach, our strategy? Because it seems like there's these two, almost like two streets, and they're seemingly at odds with each other. Is there a way to reconcile them? What's your take on that?
Yes.
I mean, you come from a different culture, from a different background, you had a different upbringing, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, for many of the Western or not so cultured backgrounds, this whole idea of okay, first you gotta purify yourself and become a good person, and then eventually get to spirituality is not so appealing.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, it would be nice to hear the devotees' reflections on this. I'll say a few things in no particular order. Oh yes, Madhusudhan. Wait, you go first.
No.
Yeah. I think, what first occurs to me is that teaching Dharma in the world today is like, and teaching Sattva, you can get enormous traction from that. I mean, devotees are going out there and basically teaching the world about sattva guna, how to live with a harmonized mind, body. This has huge appeal. You can really make inroads. And from there, the argument is that yes, then we'll take them further. And the other argument is, well, no, let's just give the real thing. Let's give the real McCoy and let's see who comes forward. I guess the first thing I would do is question your question and say, as a point of discussion, are those two approaches necessarily at odds with each other? Can those both approaches coexist in the Sankirtan movement in a healthy way in which they don't compromise each other? And my feeling from what I see in the preaching world is that you need both kind of programs, because there will be a certain amount of people who just want like the real thing. Like so many times I've been preaching and I've been telling people different things and they're just like, okay, just tell me the real thing. I want the stuff, the substance. We're trying to like tiptoe around it and they're ready, some people just want it. And then you know that there are some people who are not ready, like God is a swear word in their dictionary, so it's like, okay, we need to build it up. So from what I've seen, I think both approaches are needed, and I think there's a way in which both approaches can be integrated. I think one of our biggest problems in ISKCON, not biggest problem, dramatic statement. Speakers always make dramatic statements, not that big, but it's something to think about, is that our programs just don't integrate. Our outreach doesn't integrate with our core, and maybe because the outreach people think that the core just can't relate to these people they're going to bring in, or the core just look at these outreach people and think they're out of it, So I think one thing is just creating synergy and connection, and I think those things can seamlessly integrate. But I'll just make one other comment that, like in the world today, even the people who come to take up Krishna consciousness, like for the real thing, maybe join an ashram and all these things, you talk about, how they may, their upbringing may not have so much Dharma or Sattva in it. And therefore, for such people, I think it is valuable to share that with them and for us to help each other to develop that Dharma and Sattva. So it's like, even though here we're practicing the ultimate thing, Bhakti, but to then build that foundation below it, even though we're doing the topmost thing, to then help them for a lifetime of devotional service, I think is also a very, very good thing. So I remember there were certain devotees in the ashram who just taught me a lot of Dharma and who just taught me a lot of Sattva, and it wasn't necessarily like, direct, the real core of Krishna consciousness, but they taught me a lot of good things that helped me to try to continue serving Srila Prabhupada in this mission. So those are just some thoughts. It's a big topic. It's the $64 million question. I don't know if you want to respond to that before I go on.
Mutual respect between the two approaches without losing track of what's the ultimate goal, where we're trying to go, and to appreciate our diversity with keeping in mind the unity, what's it all about, what we're trying to achieve here, so we're not getting stuck either in liberal or conservative or spontaneous or fanatical modes, and that they can be cross-pollination. They can both benefit from each other, and that the preachers or people who are engaged, that they have regular sangha and that they're on the same page, that they understand their not just coexistence but their interdependence. Otherwise, it always becomes kind of like, oh yeah, you're the farm people, or you're the yoga people, or you're the saffron people, and it just kind of becomes like too compartmentalized. You lose the real potency.
potency of the Sangha.
Yeah. Yeah, unity and diversity. So remember.
I just was remembering that how merciful Prabhupada was, and he said, your qualification is you came when I called. And even if we're not very qualified, I think at the core, Prabhupada was so personal. And I can't remember if it's the introduction to Bhagavad Gita or another introduction, because I keep not being able to find it. But it said that the spiritual master knows the psychophysical nature of the devotee, of the disciple. So somehow, you know, like if we can be very personal in our dealings, I think everything gets resolved, because you're actually meeting people where they're at, rather than just, like you were saying, about things being compartmentalized. Yeah. So like Srila Prabhupada did so many extraordinary things, created, who'd ever had heard of a Brahmacharini ashram, you know, those things. And when I was in Bombay, Prabhupada often asked Kaushalya and Yamuna to speak at big pandals. And then, you know, there were, you know, so many things that Prabhupada did that, you know, kind of was out of the box in a lot of people's minds, you know, but they worked, you know. He just did what worked, and I believe he said one time, whatever works is the best plan. So I guess if we're really personal and really are in the serving mood, that Krishna will give us the intelligence how to balance things and how to actually be compassionate to people and engage them in a way that they can engage.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's beautiful. Yeah, Srila Prabhupada's personal approach and doing what works and being ready to adjust and change and be responsive. Prabhupada came to Butler and he said, I was just observing American culture. So he didn't have a predetermined strategy. He was ready to kind of be fluid and flexible. I'm just looking at the time, and it's 9:05, so we have a schedule. Apologies for going 5 minutes over. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai.
His Holiness Swami Bhagavan Kesava Maharaj ki Jai.